When you have an AI that is able to produce accurate intellectual property on your behalf, is able to send emails, is able to do admin work, and is probably even able to do things like write reports or articles, this simply means that you don't have to work anymore. This means that you can spend your time pursuing happiness, you can spend your time pursuing self-fulfillment, building meaningful relationships, and probably just doing a lot of self-reflection. Our claim on app is beautifully simple. On our side, people are happier, life is better. A few things in this speech. Firstly, some notes of setup. Secondly, on why this means that you don't have to work anymore. Thirdly, on self-reflection. And finally, on why this is better for tech development generally. So the first thing to say is a few points of setup. The first thing we want to point out here is that this necessarily is something that you have to consent to do. That is to say, in order to update someone's data, obviously that is something that they can consent to. Probably everyone has this device sitting around in their home, kind of like a diary, and then you get to choose to upload your information onto that, like ChatGPT. Obviously, it's something you can opt out of. Secondly, is to say that this is going to be something with a lot of legal protections. That is for the structural reason that people are very skeptical of AI, and they're worried that it's going to do things like steal your data, which means there's likely to be a lot of regulation and a lot of protection around this data. Like the first thing that looks like is to say that obviously people understand that this is not you. Therefore, they know that it can't make decisions on your behalf, and it's not going to be able to do things like sign legal documents, etc., or even just make decisions with other people. But secondly, it just means that you probably don't have legal liability for the things that it does, because people realize that is not a 100% accurate reflection of you. But the second point of setup is to say that we think you probably have legal ownership over what it produces, and the reason is obviously that people wouldn't consent to something otherwise if everything that it made was going to the corporation. And that is because, again, of the structural reason that people are afraid of uploading data to corporations in the first place. This means that people are only going to agree if they get ownership of whatever it produces, and obviously this is principally fair because it is a product of your personality, etc., etc. So you're going to own anything that it makes. So, cool, now that that setup is out of the way, let's explain why this means that you don't have to work again and why that's so good. This point is essentially proof that people don't have to work because the IP thing can do it for them. This is our simplest and clearest path to victory. So, the first thing to say here is that obviously this debate occurs in the future in which you have very advanced technology. This means that likely less and less jobs are labour intensive and more jobs are about things like intellectual ability, things like coding, etc. What this AP can do is that it can generate material on your behalf that is realistic of the kind of things that you can make, whether that's audio, visual, etc., etc. Obviously this is massively useful to corporations because this AP doesn't need to eat, it doesn't need to sleep, it doesn't feel pain, it can't be exploited, it can't get tired, it literally has no limitations, it can work constantly and no harm occurs to it because of that. What this means is that you can just outsource all of your labor to this AP. It can literally do it all for you because it is way more efficient than you, which means that it either entirely replaces your labor or massively supplements it so that it does all of the menial work and you just maybe need to check it every now and then to make sure it's not doing anything too insane. And again, because this work was mostly fairly simple, things like sending emails, etc., it's probably okay that it has 85% accuracy. But also we note that people aren't 100% the same version of themselves all the time. You get tired, you get angry, you're in a bad mood, you say things that you wouldn't say, so there's no reason why this AP is necessarily much worse than that. But obviously if it did something particularly weird, people know that APs are being used, they'll just give it to the real person to check and they can say, no, that's obviously not what I meant. Why is this important? First thing to say is that AI onto their side is also going to replace human labour. That is because society is inevitably progressing towards development of AI and the control of AI. But uniquely on our side, people now own that labour. Instead of that labour going to whatever corporation owns the AI and is able to do all the work for you. Now this is your intellectual property, this is something that you have produced, and you're the one getting all of the credit for it and all of the money from that work that is being done. This is super, super important for the individual. So what are the benefits for the individual? That is just to say that having to do labour is quite bad. It's often very draining, you have to do a lot of repetitive things, it's often very soulless, you're forced into it, so even if it is something you were passionate about in the first place, you maybe don't enjoy it by the end, you just don't have time to do things like spend time on yourself or look after your family. Having to work all the time makes people sad. This is fairly intuitive. What is the comparative? When you don't have to work all the time because your AI is doing it for you, you can do things like focus on cultivating yourself. You can do things like travel. You can do things like have fun. You can do things like build hobbies. You can do things like make new friends. This is all just generally really good things for people to do here. But note also that this is probably also good for your AP because you still have the incentive uniquely, as opposed to a side in which there's just no jobs whatsoever, to have a good AP. Because if you have a good AP, that AP is likely to get hired by better corporations or something like that, or just be cooler in general. So obviously you want to create an AP that is say curious, an AP that is going to come up with good intellectual ideas, and the way that you do that is by pursuing these activities of self-fulfillment. This is so much better for you and much better for your AP. And this is uniquely better than anything they can claim on their side. But also just that even if you didn't really care about the development of your AP, even if you just got it to do a menial office job that didn't require much creativity, you probably just had more time to have fun. You probably just could learn things for the sake of it, you could have hobbies for the sake of it, you could make cool friends. This was a massive, massive benefit to individuals. And you should weigh this material very highly because this affects everyone. This is obviously a very easy, clear win for us because this just makes quality of life so much better for everyone in general and outweighs harms to a small group of society, even if they could prove that things go wrong. So, second piece of substantive here on why this is good for self-reflection. This is to prove that this AP probably just makes you a better person, because you're able to do self-reflection much more efficiently. The first thing to explain here is that this is most likely going to be used for things like self-reflection as opposed to something like social interaction, for the simple reason that people value talking to a real person. They're unlikely to really enjoy talking to your AP very much because they want to talk to you as a real person instead. This means that its use in terms of social situations is far more going to be in reflecting on yourself. And the framing here is that, again, we think people are very likely to interact with their own AP a lot of the time. The problem with self-reflection now is just that it's hard because you have to have a dialogue with yourself. You have to try and understand your own mind, which is often very confusing, very subjective, and simply very difficult to do. On the comparative, people are good at having conversations with other people. People are good at providing advice to other people, and people are good at explaining things in a dialogue. It is so much easier when you can now have that dialogue with your AP. What are the benefits here? Firstly, it probably just helps you make decisions. You can say, what would I do in this case? And it would say, here are 5 things that you could consider doing, or here is the 5-step decision process that you would make. This just makes it way easier. You have to spend less time going through that yourself. That probably just saves you like a lot of time. And see how like when you in the status quo, when you ask people for advice, they might say follow your heart or do what you want to do, which is obviously really hard because it's hard to know that. Now you have an AP who tells you exactly what you want. That seems great. But secondly, we think it also helps you break out of the hedonic treadmill. That is to say, people get stuck in cycles of never being satisfied because they think they need to be doing more and more and more. Now you can be happy at your achievements because you literally have a 1-year-old version of yourself to praise you and say, wow, like you from a year ago would have been so happy and so proud of you for getting this achievement. That is really, really meaningful to people because you can compare your goals as of a year ago instead of constantly feeling like you need to be reaching more and achieving more. But thirdly, you can probably just store your memories in this AI. Obviously, it doesn't have a perfect recollection of memories, but you could say, remind me about this really lovely day, and it can do that for you. This means it can replay happy memories at will. This is just something that would be really enjoyable for people and quite fun, or it's probably just useful to be able to look back at memories. And then fourthly, we think that your self-reflection just gets far better in general, because instead of getting confused trying to figure everything out in your own mind, you have someone that you can have a conversation with. You can ask her questions about yourself. You could say, like, I don't know, what are my flaws? And it could tell you some, and maybe you could try and improve on those. We think that because self-reflection gets more easier, people just become more moral people, they become happier people. This was a big benefit on our side. Again, weigh this highly because it affects everyone, because everyone's able to access this technology. That was a really big benefit. But then finally, in the last minute on this speech, why this is so much better for technology development. This argument is to prove that this is better for the future of AI in general, and you get better AIs on our side. The first thing to explain here is that the rise of AI is inevitable on either side, right? That is just because that is the way that technology is progressing. This means that in the absence of APs, that means you're going to have AI based on empirical databases, things like the internet, things like how ChatGPT works currently, where it scans the whole internet for things. The problem with this is that the internet just doesn't reflect humanity very well, right? It seems pretty problematic that your model of a person and how a person thinks is based on what people post in Reddit. And also just like structurally, obviously, people post weird things on the internet, they try to fit the social norm, they don't necessarily reflect their whole personality. And also we think that it's way easier to have bias when you're using empirical data like the internet, choose what kind of thing you're going to sample. On our side, it's based about information about an individual holistically, about their personality. This is so much better. At the point at which AI is able to get agency and is able to become all powerful, we don't want some weird supervillain based on Reddit data. We would so much prefer an AI that takes into account the beautiful, unique personalities of everyone on this world. That is so much better. So proud of them.
Audible. If you have AI with 85% of your personality, that AI will say, I don't want to work in 85% of your people. We're proud to win today because one, they never explain why having AI with personality actually increases productivity. We can just produce AI, and we can just, provide universal basic income or something like that. But B, like we already explained, AP has your personality, and it's very likely that this AP will say, I don't want to work, I don't want to produce anything. In that situation, it's very, very harmful for productivity. That's why I'm very proud to oppose this motion. So I'm going to do 4 things. First, setup. Second, talking about consent, why it's so bad. But 3, dependence on technology. 4, why self-reflection is actually bad. First, two things to note here. First is that this is a distinctive AI from AI we have in the status quo, right? Which has different persona or no persona in the current situation. That means that ChatGPT or Google were helpful and harmless those AIs. We can support the existence of those things, but we think that they are distinct, like who have distinct personal and no persona, which means that the productivity argument coming from their side is asymmetric or even worse, as I said. The second thing, AI is somehow connected to the internet or cloud-based system because the big data is too big and you cannot basically store in the like the hardware. Meaning that we already explained, or we will also explain why it's also even if it's in the hardware, we think that the people can access to those things because others can obviously access to local devices. For example, partners accessing your forms, for example. Meaning that it's so harmful, and meaning that because it has your memories, like the preferences or all the like personal information that you want to hide, meaning that it will be a massive harm on their side. So let's move on to the first argument, which is about consent. So I'm going to clarify what kind of actors will be able to access to data or such AP. Meaning that, of course, like users will be able to access to it, but one, we have hackers and scammers who can access to the personal data in this like cloud-based system can also access to it. But secondly, we think that also companies can, access to such data with the illegal data mining or those things. Meaning that, of course, the technologies are likely to be produced by private companies on their side of the house, analogy is that we also have so many technologies done by private corporations. So also, thirdly, we think that people who are close to you can also access to your AP, right? We can see that how many parents or partners are accessing to your phones and you're checking your pictures or something like that. We know that for those reasons, they have substantial power to invade your privacy. For example, if parents log into your phones, they can ask those APs are you taking drugs or what is your sexuality or those things. But even if the AP said I don't want to answer that question, I think firstly it's unlikely for the reason that the companies have the incentive to make this AP very open and disclosive for the reason that it wants to help the people make decisions, which means that they're designed to answer very personal questions. But secondly, even if it's prohibited, I think 15% error exists, which means that they are likely to disclose these kind of things in a 15% of chance. Meaning that also, secondly, corporations or scammers, they can extract data without communicating with this AP, right? They can just take out the data from the database. Meaning that it's massive infringement of your privacy. Meaning that in that situation, their data is likely to be used in various ways, like vote preference or consumption preference, like all other companies will use your data to basically analyze what kind of advertisement will stick to you, for example. We think that it's empirically it has been true that the companies, no sophisticated data companies could protect their data perfectly, right? Which means that the privacy is likely to be very infringed. Why privacy is so important? One, simply you feel awkward, right? When you are communicating with the others, you will wonder the others are actually knowing your memory or preference, all these kind of things. Meaning that privacy or secrets is the fundamental part of your communication, because communication is basically to disclose your idea, right? Which means that the fundamental idea of this communication is to have something that you don't disclose to others. I mean that this is the fundamental basis of the communication. But also secondly, there's a power asymmetry, right? Because companies are using you without your consent or without benefiting you, right? I mean that this is a massive exploitation of the companies. But the second argument here is that the dependence on technologies, which is the extension of this consent argument. What happens when people who own AP die or disabled in these situations? Meaning that people who are close to them have incentive to keep these APs by inheritance or those things, right? Because those parents have the insurance policy, I want you to keep your AP because when you die, you will be, sad, for example. In fact, here is that your partners or families feel difficult to abandon these AP, and it's very harder for them to process grief and move on to the next thing. The mechanism here is that one, those people are most vulnerable people. They need someone to rely on, and they are likely to rely on your phones, not other people, which which is unsustainable, meaning that it's very bad for them because they will not go outside, for example. They will not do meaningful things that makes you forget about your grade, meaning that you will just repeatedly remember your grade. But secondly, companies are very predatory, which means that it's very difficult to opt out. Even if you push the deactivate button, it's very likely that those companies will prepare a reactivate button in order to make them opt in again and make you pay subscription fee, for example. Which means that these people will be more vulnerable, will be more difficult to overcome their grade, which is a very significant harm. Lastly, the impact on the people who use AP, which is basically the flip of their self-reflection. So meaning that talking to the assistants with 85% understanding of your personality or memory or all kinds of things is unpleasant, right? Meaning that it's a very harmful experience. The characterization of people here is that one, people have negative image to you, which means that you're likely to ask questions that try to reveal your negative experiences or try to know about your negative side, which means that those people are likely to ask AP the questions about their negative sides or the things that they think that those people are bad of. We think that in that situation, it will stigmatize those people again, right? We think that they will confirm that this is the bad personality or this is the bad characteristic of you. We think that this reinforcement of your negative experiences and negative image about you is very harmful. But secondly, people don't trust your inner thoughts, which means that you are likely to use AP in order to confirm your inner thoughts, which means that whenever you make choices, you're likely to type in the question and try to confirm whether that answer aligns with your answer, which means that 15% of mistake, right? With 15% of chance, you will have the different answers from your true preference. But also we think that the confirming itself is very harmful because it basically disrupts your decision. You cannot make decisions by yourself. For all those reasons, it's not productive, it's harmful, very powerful tools.
The problem with the negative harm is that it relies upon them and their case is that you hackers and people interact with the AI and spill secrets. But this is where Techi's intro comes back to bite him, because why would an individual want to reveal their secrets to other people? So why would the AI want to reveal important things about themselves to other individuals? And why is the AI interacting with others in these circumstances? We characterize to you that the AI is mostly doing stuff with yourself and doing stuff within that. 2 questions in this speech. Firstly, a question about, I guess, hacking and how the AI can expose you in the worst harms that they push. Secondly, a question on then, I guess, greed. And then thirdly, a question on self-reflection. So, firstly, a question on the exposure of self. I think the first thing to note is that around the AI doing bad actions, we believe that a set of regulation exists in order to protect individuals and protect people. And we think that regulation exists for a set of 3-fold reasons beyond what Mary explains to you. First, we argue that individuals have strong feelings about IP. For example, individuals write a book or create an original character, and they have some natural feeling that is that one's own achievement. And so they basically want that to be protected, and they believe that it's something that deserves to be protected. We believe in these circumstances when you have an AI, we think that is a cloning of yourself. That is only extended to a much greater margin, and people are going to feel a much greater ick about wanting to protect what is basically themselves. And so we thought that there existed a lot of protection around this. The second claim that they make is that we think it's basically cloning people, and individuals probably want to ensure that the cloning of individuals is done in a good way. But the third thing to say is that people don't want to be implicated in, the crimes or the problems of their AI. So they don't want to ensure that it's done in a good way and interacts and regulates in a good way. So I think, yes, while these are perhaps somewhat new mechanisms, they do a lot to take out the broad swaths of those arguments. However, let's go through them individually and see why they don't work. They try to have a question like, you might get hacked in these situations. Firstly, we think those same mechanisms before explain why there are strong security incentives to exist in order to protect this AI. Secondly, we believe that this AI, because it works on your command and interacts with you, there's going to be a strong verification that's linked to explicitly to you. So if you interact with the AI, which is in a way that isn't you, as the hackers probably will do, then it probably can't react to your commands, it doesn't react to you. So when you ask a question because you hack into it, then we think that then you can't get these information. The third thing to say is I'm unclear on what the difference is to the status quo. Because there is an ungodly amount of data of you on the internet. There is an ungodly amount of data on you on your computer. They could, for example, just go through your information. They could just go through your homework folder to determine. Is that they explain that there's a 15% of error, and that could lead to some problems. But the first thing to say is that you probably aren't yourself about 15% of the time. That is, you are angry, you are hungry, you didn't sleep as well, something has just come up, the day isn't going your way. So we think this 15% of time is probably reflective of yourself in that way. But secondly, at the point where it does screw up by being 15% of yourself not the time, this is probably just like it acts in a different way to you would, and perhaps it has somewhat different incentives, different interests. And that's probably good for the reasons of helping you make decisions, as Mary explained. Well, I don't see why that would lead to massive exposure of a lot of things. The third push that they like to trade, they like to push, is that they say that you can ask a bunch of questions to get a bunch of information. Firstly, it's unclear why you're ever interacting with this AI and it's forward-facing. But if it is forward-facing and you're interacting with you, it's probably going to tell you to get bent if you're being annoying with a bunch of questions to it, as anyone would be if they're being asked a bunch of questions about themselves, their individual. So it's unclear why you continue to they'll ever expose this information. But secondly, you can just do this in the status quo and ask a bunch of annoying questions until someone slips up. So unclear what the comparative is. But the next claim that I like to say that they push is that they say what you call your exposed self. But I think my introduction highlights how you probably clearly don't want to expose yourself. So as this AI is reflective of you, you probably don't want to reflect of you. Oh yeah. And then the final thing that they probably say is that ultimately all says that you probably won't be revealed in bad ways. You're probably not going to be a bunch of harm to this, and especially not to the extent where the comparative is this information can be accessed in probably much easier ways without needing to interact with this AI, by digging through your metadata, by digging through your Facebook posts, by digging through your interactions with individuals. So let's then push onto the second bit about corporate incentives and other things. So they say that the Tetchy likes to try and push where it's you can't overcome greed in this situation, so this is never going to be turned off. But I think the regulation that we explained that exists and the incentives in order so that yourself isn't out there all the time explains why you probably want a great amount of control over yourself and your personal AI. But secondly, we argue to you that if it is likely to be taking commands of yourself, then it's not something that AI probably cannot control. The second kind of push is what the introduction was why will this AI work? We think there are threefold reasons. Firstly, this is something you can control. Secondly, there are no physical limitations. And the problem that you have with working is that you get tired or it's kind of boring, but we think as an AI, you don't face these problems, and so that's why you work. But thirdly, and if you want, the meta funny response, it's you want to make money, and that AI is probably reflective of that desire to make money, so it works to meet that desire. So and then ultimately we think then that deal. And then there are also people. we think then that deals with their claim about is likely to be greedy. Let's then move on to the final push where they're like, well, it's kind of probably, ask questions of self-reflection is bad. And I guess, So, on the counterfactual and the comparative that they argue, is that they say they can have other forms of AI that are likely just to be as productive. But there are two problems with this. Firstly, these model AI that they rely upon are things like neural networks, which are trained on identifying very basic things. So it's like, for example, well, they're very good at telling the difference between a B or a 3, but you introduce a 2 into the mix and it's much harder for them to tell. So you get large swaths of databases, and as a result, they're trained on these databases. We argue the comparative that exists under our side is that you're able to make decisions, and what you argue is that the AI is able to be creative. That's where the unique productivity benefit exists under our side. We value that contribution quite highly because it meant that individuals were able to earn more money. It meant that individuals were able to, not work as much. The second the second point that they like to say is that, well, people it's going to be a bad reflection upon oneself. But what we argue to you is that when you are able to critique and interact with the AI, we feel that individuals are able to, I guess you can firstly make good decisions, and it's perfect for people, say, with anxiety, and anxiety disorders, because they often get a tumble in the decisions and they get caught in the tumble between decisions. So you can probably ask questions of this AI and you can debate in a way that you probably could never debate in yourself, because you're reflecting on yourself, you're aware of how you would respond, you're interacting with the distinct individuals, and we argue that humans are much better at interacting with others because that's what we've done for ages, that's our evolution. So we thought that you were able to better create decisions, and better able to reflect upon yourself. But secondly, we think there are a set of biases, or that you just are unaware of systems, aspects of yourself. So for example, you might be unaware of a certain speech and a certain tick in how you speak. You might be unaware of certain decisions that you might be making, certain biases that you might have. However, it's much easier to identify these biases in other individuals. So we thought these AI were pretty good in those systems because you're interacting with another person, you're talking to another person, and you have a visual representation of these problems. We thought that meant that you were able to ultimately make a lot better of these decisions. While in the comparative, while in the comparative, when you thought you had the other AI, they had an input problem where it's like the outcome is probably going to be tried to be achieved in the best way possible. However, we have one who has discretion, one who is human, so it meant that when you ask a bit decisions, ultimately you can do very well. Why then have we think the Affirmative team were far ahead in this debate? Firstly, we made you just much more productive at work. We thought that the very menial things that took up times in your day that you found most annoying, things like emails, were taken out, which made people more productive, which made people enjoy work more, which we thought then was a very certain harm that you as a benefit that you should weigh quite highly over the very speculative one that benefited everyone. But secondly, individuals were able to properly reflect on themselves and improve. We thought this was something that was very hard to achieve in the comparative, and you probably didn't accept the talk of others and talk of friends because you thought they don't understand you completely. While interacting with an AI, they are yourself, you are understanding completely. So ultimately you could interact and be better, very powerful.
Affirmative's benefits are not unique. We are rapidly moving towards a world where we will have technology that gets rid of menial labour, and this does not require your personality. They do not justify for a second like mine. We are moving to a world where things like self-reflection, which I think are probably easier than they say, something you can do, but additionally something that will only become easier when we do get more access to things like future therapy and that kind of stuff, do not happen. But also in a world in which I do not think the imperative of either of these are particularly strong. Compare that to the harms that we bring you. Harms surrounding mass data leakage of literally every single memory you have ever had, of who you are as a person, the way you make decisions, the calculus you live your life. Clearly, that is a massive risk. That is one that we think is much more likely to actualise and one that wins us the debate. Firstly, on some characterisation, secondly on work, finally on a better person, and finally if I have time on technological development. On characterisation, the first thing they tell you here is you can consent. But note that they tell you to be involved in the economy, you need to do this. That is the most coercive thing possible, because no company is going to hire you when they can hire someone who instead has something that can work as they tell you around the clock, that doesn't need to eat, doesn't need to sleep, all that kind of stuff. That means that literally to earn money in the society, to engage, to have a job, to be a human, you have to opt into it. And they basically concede this, right? Like they talk about this as if it is something that would be universal. Just note how coercive that is and how harmful. Secondly, legal protections. And there is one reason why this is likely protected legally, which is that people are skeptical of AI. Firstly, people are not particularly skeptical of AI, particularly when it is sold to them as something that means that they're going to be able to travel all day, like this team has told them. That means that people are going to embrace it with open arms. They're going to want it immediately. And I think that, again, this is just true status quo, where people maybe are slightly skeptical and nervous of AI, but not enough to do things like compel governments to take particular action on it, or able to break through corporate barriers that mean that it is actually just really hard to regulate those kind of things. The second thing, though, is that often there just is a legislative delay. That is to say that technology is created, it is able to get out there, it is able to take people's information, and then it has a monopoly effect on this, right? Like, it is able to do things like, again, lobby governments with this sort of data, with this people already want or like the service, it's then hard to remove it. So, like, Uber did this in status quo, ChatGPT is currently doing this. That means that it is likely to get a foot in and then be really hard to regulate. Thirdly, though, it is created by companies, it is created by institutions, just with a lot of power, that hire a lot of people, that have a lot of power over governments, particularly when they get this sort of data. I think that means they're able to do a lot there, and leads to weak regulation, comes government sponsored. But finally, I think that this is still a world with different jurisdictions, and to that extent, some jurisdictions will just have weak regulation. And that's because the incentive is very clear, right? Like, to the extent that governments, like, potentially corrupt governments can, or like any form of government can get access to this, to do things like understand how people will vote, or even understand like what people want and stuff like that, even if it is intended in a good way. Like, there are still obvious incentives why you would want this. This means some areas do not have this regulation, and that is particularly harmful because that, like, obviously harms people in those areas, but also means that other companies are likely to like downgrade their regulation. What that means is I think that there is likely to be very poor regulation, but note that even if there's the best regulation ever, there's a massive incentive to break it where you can, and that is because the benefit you get is massive. You literally know how people work, which means that even if they get all the regulation in the world, very, very likely that people break it. Even if people don't break it, we still think that there are ways with it regulated that people are going to get access to information. Why do they tell you you're not going to be able to get access? They say there's no abuse because the AI will simply say no and not give out this information. Firstly, this is what we tell you at first, that a lot of this access is back end. To the extent that you give this to your employers, they just probably do have access to a large swathe of your memories, right? Like, truly, truly shocking and awful. But secondly, I think that it's pretty likely, particularly in the instances of family or people who know you very well, that they can just ask this in a way that you would ask it. Say, hi, I'm wondering, about X today, and ask a really personal question. Particularly when I want to say people can use this for self-reflection. People are likely to ask these personal questions themselves. It's not likely to be out of line. But finally, and I think something they miss and something that is truly defeating to this team is this is a model of you. It is living in a black box. It has no ability to see the world or engage with the world around it. All it knows is you and your preferences. And that means that it cannot see who is asking. It cannot know the context around you. It cannot know like what context is being placed in or who is interrogating it and stuff like that. And that means that it is awful. The final response here is to say, what is the difference to the status quo? Obvious difference. It has all your memories. It knows all the decisions, or 85% of the decisions you've made. It is not a homework folder or some metadata on the internet. That is truly terrifying. And this means that people will access it. The harms are massive. That it does truly tear individuals apart. That it does lead to things like blackmail. That it does lead to things like coercion. But it is also probably just a principal massive violation of consent. And I think that is a truly, truly terrifying word. One that wins us the debate, regardless of whether they abolish work, regardless of whether they make people slightly better people. Let's so engage with their content here, which I think does not stand up. Firstly, on work, they tell us that the AP is likely to do small menial labour, and that is great. I think, again, we explained this can be done with other sorts of AI. They do not explain why an AP is necessary to do this, why it needs to have your memories and stuff like that. And just gut check this, right? We are moving towards a world where an AP is not predicted. This is not a technology that is in the immediate future, but where getting rid of menial labour is in the immediate future and something that people are preparing for, working towards. So I think we are very likely to get this benefit. But I also think that this is, again, just particularly scary. For the reason that they don't actually explain why this, or in situations where they implement, this is a particularly good thing to implement. I would suggest that you should not just believe that work is always bad. People are passionate about the work that they do. It gives them a community and people around them, particularly in a world as well where they say you're going to spend a fair amount of time thinking to yourself in a little black box and asking it questions. I think going out and having a job that you somewhat care about, having people around you and a purpose and feeling like you're doing something is great. And that means that even if we don't get this work transition, potentially even a benefit for us, something that again I don't think is at least massive impact in the debate, something that I just don't think they should be able to win on. Then on being a better person. And I think again this is where we again come up over the book. So their claim here is basically threefold. Firstly, they say it allows you to self-reflect and be able to have a dialogue with yourself. I would just point out this is not that hard. Most people, by the time they reach adulthood, are able to do things like self-reflect relatively well. They come up with strategies like things like writing diaries where they can look backward. They don't explain why this step for self-reflection is particularly important. I will explain why it's particularly harmful. But additionally, I think as we move into the future, things like studies on how to self-reflect and stuff like that just mean that people are more likely to get in touch with this. The breaking down of societal norms surrounding sharing emotions and stuff like that just means that this is all likely to get a lot better. Secondly, they say it means you're going to be able to make better decisions. Again, I will point out people are pretty good at making decisions for themselves. Unclear why we need things to be able to do this, particularly when they do get it wrong 15% of the time, and they're like, you'll know. You probably won't. You'll see this decision, you'll be like, maybe that is the decision I'll make. How are you going to identify between the wrong and the right decisions? That at least you're overthinking it, or worse, acting on decisions that are not accurate, and then having to deal with the harms of that, whether that looks like taking a job you don't want, or like having a conversation with a friend you don't want, or something like that. I think that can again be detrimental. The final point here is on memories. They say it's really good to be able to store your memories. I think that this is just incredibly bad. You probably want to be able to forget things that have happened to you. A lot of people probably do. And to the extent that you have a black box with all of these memories, you are able to access it wherever you want. And I think that just means that people are likely to get sucked into this, to get sucked into living over moments of their lives that they hyperfixate on, but they wonder if it could have gone a bit differently. And that, I just think we want to be able to forget, we want to be able to move on. They do not allow people to forget because they literally need it to be able to have a job, right? Like, truly, truly awful. But I think that, again, the final reason why this just makes people a whole lot worse is just imagine if you ask this AI a question and it reveals something truly terrible about yourself. You ask it a range of hypotheticals that just reveal that you are a selfish or like immoral person. How do you feel and how do you reconcile with that? Because I would suggest that just leads to people collapsing. Because under status quo, you're able to justify that. You're able to say, I would act differently in the future, to rationalize it and hypotheticalize it. But I think in this world, it is one where you do not know how to cope with that, you do not know how to internalize that. Your self-perception of yourself is incredibly, incredibly bad. And again, I think this just leads to significantly worse people. People who go, it's okay to be bad, because that's just who I am. That's what my AI would do, so I'm also going to do that. That is justifiable. Again, I think that is also where we're going to be content on grief that is incredibly, incredibly important. Because in a world where people are able to coerce their relatives into giving this to them, because they want their relatives to have a memory of them, because their relatives really, really want to have a memory of them, again, it doesn't allow people to move on, it doesn't allow people to move their lives. On technological development, I think we're likely to give it better databases as it goes on, but additionally, unclear why this is used for good, we suggest it is used for bad. So happy to oppose.
Before I start my speech, I'd like to shout out my family for coming and also let's dispel the dystopia on their side. Let's imagine what a good life looks like. A good life probably looks like you being an executive of a big company, and in that big company you have a very well-trained secretary who really knows what you think, knows your study schedule, and understands what you want. And that secretary can answer all of your emails, do all of your menial labor, and you can do all the creative things like inventing an iPhone or reading and thinking and cultivating yourself. But importantly, while that secretary does all of your work, people know that that secretary is not you at the end of the day. That secretary may be representative of your preferences, but that secretary is not going to override you if you have to sign a contract. That secretary is not going to launch you into crippling self-doubt or give your personal information away. At the end of the day, this team needed to do a reality check on this AI. And that reality check was that people internalized that this AI was not perfectly accurate. It was 85% representation of them. It was a thing that existed on a computer and not something that had a living corporeal form of them that replicated them. And if you take that kind of mindset, I think a lot of their harms fade away. Firstly, how is this AP used? Secondly, on consent, and lastly, on self-reflection. Firstly, how this AP is used. In terms of labor, this is where they consistently misunderstand us. They say they can get AI and innovation, that means they can get all the labor and productivity gains on their side. This misunderstands our point. When corporations create AI, that AI is the intellectual property of those corporations, which means that all the work that corporations do is not credited to you. You do not get money from that. You do not have any bargaining power. That is very different from our side. When people see this AP as your intellectual property. And we know that this is the world that is likely to develop. Because in the status quo, people have very strong intuitions about what their ownership is. People have copyright laws about the books that they write, the work that they do. And at the point at which this IP is yours, when corporations use that, they'll have to pay you. Those are the kinds of things that happen. Which means that we live in a future where we don't just get rid of the need for labor, but we actually develop a system of redistribution where people are able to profit off that labor with actually engaging in the menial task of labor. The only world where they can get any kind of money is maybe if like Andrew Yang becomes president and imposes a UBA Act. They have not actually proved this. That is why we massively get a benefit in terms of employment. But the second problem with an AI automation future is that when everything is automated, people get bored. People are purposeless because AI can do everything you can do. We solve that happiness problem as well because people are not entirely useless. They still need to upload their data into this AP in order for that AP to be productive. They have to upload their wisdom and all that kind of stuff, which means people have incentives to engage in learning, to cultivate themselves, read, travel, go to business management classes, eat at a 5-star restaurant, and then not write the review because their AP can do it for you and you can be a food critic that way. You never have to answer an email again. You never have to get chronic back pain when you're sitting in a seat 8 hours a day. That is the future we imagine, and that massively eclipses any of the harms that they talk about. The scale of the benefit that we talk about is monstrous compared to the weird eeriness of this thing being a bit like you, or oh god, privacy, as if we haven't given up all our privacy already when we ticked all the terms and condition boxes on Facebook. I don't think that was very comparative. But let's deal with the main win condition about consent. Gypsy's claim is that you cannot consent because you are compelled to be into this to be part of the economic system, which is a pretty good response. But firstly, there's a massive concession that this system would work in order to generate value of productivity. But secondly, the thing to say here is that our point wasn't that individuals sign a waiver and consent. Our point was that in society as a whole consents to the concept of using this, right? So for example, before computers were invented, people did not recognize there was a concept of computers. And for computers to be made, companies had to reassure people that computers would be safe, they won't blow up, they're going to be useful. And that kind of dialogue within society is a form of societal consent. That means that the computer developed into a safe and effective technology. This is the kind of process that would happen with AP. It's not about individuals signing waivers. It's about, as a society, as a collective, we develop AP into something that is useful, productive, and safe and regulated to use before people buy into that thing. And we know that these things will happen because people have so much suspicion over how their data is used under the status quo. That is why, for example, in the EU, you have GDPR laws where people have to tick boxes for cookies and all that kind of stuff. These are real policy challenges. These are not things that corporations can just take away. What are two other claims about consent? Firstly, the idea that there are hackers and scammers. Firstly, we explain a set of security incentives for these corporations. Secondly, the really interesting thing about this is that this has foolproof authentication. So the way that authentication works under the status quo is that your machine can't read you or verify your identity. So you put in a proxy information, like a password, right? And hackers are able to guess that password or social engineer that password out of you. That is very different when you have a machine where you upload your consciousness onto it and it recognizes you, which means that only you have the 97% match of all the information that is within your brain that is matching the information within this machine. Which means that a hacker can never hack you because they don't have that replica of you. They don't have you. And if they did, they wouldn't need to hack you in the first place. But lastly, we explained that there is a system of accountability because people know that this is meant to replicate you. So if your AP randomly started deciding to transfer all your money out to a music festival or something like that, banks would raise that this suspicion is probably suspicious and throw it back to you so that you could consent to that thing. The last claim is the idea that corporations use your data. This is probably the best claim. The first thing we explain is that people are suspicious of corporations. This is a very big step to give all your AP away, which means that corporations would have to engage in some kind of incentive structure where when they develop the technology for society as a whole to buy in, they need to prove that you can get money and that you have ownership of your IP and all that kind of stuff. The second thing is that it's very difficult to corporations to plagiarize you and take away your value because the whole value of this AP is that it is you, right? So for example, a corporation can't have a painting done by Van Gogh, for example, if that Van Gogh did not paint that, because the whole point of the AP is they can say this painter AP thing is like Van Gogh. They can't say that anymore. That is different to data which is de-identified. They can just take your data and use it for plagiaristic purposes. But lastly, people have the ability to opt out. And the structural reason for this is because the thing with data is that it's static. People take your data and then they run away with it and you can never take your data back. The use and the difference of AP is that it's not information, it is a persona, right? It is something that activates what you think about, and the use of it to a company is the fact that it can constantly do things and replicate your thoughts, which means that there is an ongoing process in which you can deny that AP to that corporation if you need to. And lastly, even if those harms did manifest, those harms manifest just as badly on your side, because in a post-automation future, people already uploaded so much of their data, but that data was just misaligned with people's preferences. is, at least on our side, it was reflective of you. Lastly, on self-reflection. They say talking to yourself is unpleasant and you self-justify deprecation. But people already do this. People already have self-doubt. People already spiral. People have ideas of you. And that's when your friends come to you and tell you to stay rational, stay calm. This is not what you wanted. And people often consult their friends on these kind of decisions. And they can't make those decisions of themselves because the fog of their brain or the intensity of the adrenaline in the aftermath of an argument that they had with someone clouds their decision to do this. And the difference is what the AP can actually do is outline your rationale. They can draw a tree diagram. They can explain your step-by-step reasons and your rationale for wanting to do something. And that means you can rationally do this. And people in the real world already replicate this. When people try to make decisions, they do a to-do list or a pros and cons list, or they try to brainstorm the kinds of things that they think about, or write in a diary. Ultimately, it's a useful elaboration tool, but they know it's not them. And the contextlessness that Gypsy talks about is useful because this AP is not you in your current depressed state. It is you a year ago that was rational, that did have those ambitions. At the end of the day, the useful frame they never dealt with on the outside was that AI existed on their side, but their AI was a cold metallic machine, one that was owned by corporations. Our AI was something that was repurposed by you and something that truly represented your heart and your mind. For these reasons, very, very proud to propose.
At the end of this debate, they only have one real path to victory, and that is the idea that every single person in this room's personality is so deeply unique that instead of a company just choosing whoever in this room or whoever in the world would be the best version of a corporate lawyer, would be the best version of a banker, would be the best version of a politician, and creating 1,000 or 10,000 or a million instances of that personality and filling all the roles with it, that those companies would instead go through all of the hassle of reading through the profiles of every single AP that is being submitted to a job and choosing one of each one to fill these roles. That is their path to victory, the idea that all of us could monetize our AP. But I think that's quite unlikely. I think that obviously the more plausible thing to believe here is that perhaps they would choose a singular person who's very productive, or maybe a set of 10 personalities that are very productive. And the owners of those APs, maybe they become billionaires or trillionaires. The rest of us really don't have that much of a value to add here. Because most people's personalities are not optimized towards corporate drudgery or towards filling out particular forms of paperwork or writing menial emails. Most people's personalities are much more complex than that. Most of us have a variety of different things that motivate us, and I don't understand why a version of your personality that is trapped in a black box, that has no family that it cares about, that can't go on holiday, that doesn't get the money from your job, why it would be motivated to work, let alone do a particularly good job of it. And I think that they really don't respond to the challenge that we give you in Ted Xi's speech. Why would it care? Why would it want to do the work? Why would it be a valuable employee? They still cannot respond even at the end of their speeches, which means that at this point they're clearly losing this debate. The only thing that they give you, I think, is the idea that perhaps this thing is able to do creative work, and maybe your creative production would be valuable. But even this is completely unexplained. Most people are not very good at being authors or artists. This thing is limited only towards digital production. And even to the extent that maybe it can create some value here, I would just suggest that the value of that, to the extent that it does do that, that is an extraordinarily sad version of the future and what creativity and human process looks like. Because in a world where you can go onto you want to buy a book, and it seems like all of the successful authors have created 100 instances of themselves. Like you have 100 digital versions of Rick Riordan or any Chuck Tingle, whatever, and they're producing 100 books every day at light speed. It seems like if you wanted to participate in the creative process, you wanted to have a stage, you wanted people to read your works and to know you and what you produce, you wouldn't be able to do it because you're drowned out by the world's most advanced versions of coffee bots. Extraordinarily sad. I think this team denies people something that matters a lot to them, something that we would not deny them in a world where maybe we have a hyper-competent and deeply bland and boring ChatGPT that writes all your emails for you, that does the menial tasks. But it is obviously unable to participate in the deeply human process of creating art and that kind of thing. So I think that if you think work was their path to victory, at this point, if Ted Xi's intro did not convince you, they're probably out of the debate on that. Which means that really the meat of this debate should be about the psychological experience you have when you interact with this, about your self-reflection and about what it means for people. And the thing that they provide here is almost meaningless. I would not even call it a path to victory for them. They basically suggest that this is kind of like a diary but better. It's kind of like pros and cons list better. It doesn't really seem like a very strong comparative to me. But what we would suggest to you is that in many instances, by the logic that they give, by the fact that people trust this AI, by the fact that people are risk averse, and often scared of opening up and scared of being vulnerable, that there's a real chance that for many people, particularly the ones who are most anxious about opening up, that this becomes a way to replace human friendship and human connection. That instead of taking the risk, that you go to your friend and you explain a dilemma that you're in to them, that you risk embarrassing yourself, that you risk the fact that they might laugh at you, that they have that information, that they might reveal it, that they might respond in a way that you find off-putting. Instead of going to them for advice, you probably just go to your AP instead. And I think that that's an extremely sad thought to have. Two of my closest friends, one of them is in many respects extremely similar to me, and one is very, very different to me. And that's what gives them, I guess, a kind of very unique ability to help me. Because when I talk to my friends who are similar to me, often they're able to, give me a shared set of values and evaluate things in that sense. But they have a different understanding of the world. They lack my myopia. They might be more optimistic than me. They might have different information than I do. That is what means that they're able to give me good advice that breaks me out of the deadlock, breaks me out of the thing that is turning over and over in my head. This AP cannot give you that, and in fact, it supplants it. Or perhaps it is more valuable for you sometimes to talk to a friend who is different to you, who has different values, who has a completely different understanding of what is in the world and what you should do. That is also something that I think people need to be pushed to take the risk of doing. And that is important, because it means that you can learn to see the world in a different way. You can develop your understanding of your own values and what matters. You can progress as a person. But when you talk to this AP, it locks you into the version of yourself that you were a year ago. People struggle to know themselves. People are in a continual process of learning to know themselves. And I think that at the point where you know this AP knows 85% of you, that might be more than what many of us will ever achieve in our lifetime. And it means that in many cases, I think people would just go to the AP, they would talk to the computer and the dialogue box. They would not take the risk of human interaction. They would remain trapped in the version of themselves that they uploaded a year ago, and they would continue to turn these problems over and over again. The more that is normalized, the more that this team argues that that might be desirable, the more that society moves into a norm where people cannot develop as individuals, where people cannot progress past the most vulnerable moments of their life or the most traumatic moments of their life. Because the second thing that they provide to you is the suggestion that this thing has perfect recall of your memories. And we explained to you at Gypsy's speech, to no response in David's, that people will not use this well, that they will dwell on the things that they did wrong, that if they've lost somebody that they care about or they're grieving, that they're likely to dwell on their own AP's memories of that person, or worse still, to rely on the AP of that person who is gone, to continue to talk to it, to struggle to hit that deactivate button, to be tempted to reactivate it every single day. That is extraordinarily hard, and means that I think this is a world where people rely on their computers to deal with their grief, to deal with their insecurity. And every time that they do that, it makes that insecurity worse. Every time that you choose to go to that computer, and you choose to rely on it, and it worsens and reinforces your worst possible tendencies, reinforces your insecurity, explains to you, yeah, you should be scared. I'm scared too. That's a bad thing for you, and it means that you fall out of the habit of talking to your friends, fall out of the habit of getting useful advice from the people around you. And it's easy to do that. Think of how weird it was after COVID, the first time you hang out with somebody in person, how rusty your social skills felt, how difficult it was, once again, to even just manage things like physical interaction, because you were so unused to doing it. People do lose these skills, they lose them quickly, and I think on this side, they lose them permanently. This is a disaster. The only thing that they give you to counterbalance this, the only form of personal growth that they suggest, is given in David's speech, where they say, oh, well, economics motivates you to seek out new experiences, to improve the value of the memories that you upload to this machine. And they suggest this as a kind of victory over the self, where you upload and you recognize the value, relies on the idea that your AP can get a job, and it's just most people's would not. But the second thing that this does is it is just not a victory, it is defeat. It's uploading yourself and giving your memories to the machine in the hopes that it lets you live, in the hopes that your AP goes out and finds you some money. I can't imagine a more disempowering experience than that. Which means this is not something that is valuable for people. It takes away their power, it traps them in the worst versions of themselves, and it means that people lose necessary social and coping skills. Extremely bad for human development. The last thing, and the other path to victory that we provide you with, is the way that this empowers the company that controls this technology, or empowers the people who access it. Their only response, again, at David, not in their setup, is the idea that, oh, maybe to access it, you have to put on the electrodes to use it every time. Unclear that's true. Why would it be? The second thing is that it doesn't understand how data breaches work, right? It's not like the scammers just sit there and type in passwords until one of them works. They get access to things like backdoors or data breaches, Like, they suggest that you have an incentive to protect it. I guess all of the Optus companies, customers in this room, probably want their phone numbers to be kept private. Tough luck, guys. Doesn't seem like it's very possible. Seems like the incentives here are very bad. Because we made sure that people remained social animals, and we gave you a meaningful path towards becoming a better and happier person, proud to negate.